Thank you so much for attending our webinar about how companies can successfully retain diverse talent. And of course, thank you to our expert panelists who you see on the screen right now. My name is Christina and my pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm a partnerships manager at AllVoices. Just to give some context around AllVoices, we're an always-on employee listening tool, which is used to really create that culture of trust, inclusion, and transparency at companies really around the world. And customers include kind of high growth companies who really value that diversity, equity, and inclusion, like Scopely, Box, BuzzFeed, and Chime. And really to start out as well, I want to acknowledge that diversity in itself is a large word that encompasses a lot. So for today's conversation, we're really defining diverse talent as folks who are coming from a historically marginalized background, and you can think of employee resource groups that might be available at your company. Also, it's February, we are celebrating Black History Month, so it's especially important to talk about retaining Black and BIPOC employees at organizations as well, while also recognizing that no group is one monolith, right? But the strategies we talk about, there are ways that you can retain talent, like empathetic listening, being proactive with feedback, and really offering inclusive benefits. And we also know that diversity is not just a nice to have, it's a need to have. And according to different reports like McKinsey, 61% of employees believe diversity and inclusion strategies are really beneficial and essential in their workplace. And then also in terms of the bottom line, diverse companies can see like a 2.3 times higher cash flow rate per employee when they have those diverse teams. So if you have any questions, feel free to write it in the GoToWebinar chat, but I'll stop talking, and to kick things off, I wanted to pass it over to the panelists to introduce themselves. If you could give your kind of name, pronouns, and area of expertise, that would be great. Cairo, if you wanted to start first.
Yeah, sure. I'm Cairo. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a customer success leader. I specialize in building customer success teams in early stage startups.
Brandon, do you want to go?
Awesome. Hello, folks. My name is Brandon Bell. I use he, him pronouns. I serve as the North American Diversity and Inclusion Lead for Syngenta Agriculture, and I have the opportunity to moonlight as a consultant and facilitator at ReadySet.
Amazing. And Belinda?
And my name is Belinda Reed Shannon. I'm the my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm the Vice President of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging at Scopely, a global mobile games company. And I started out as a management side lawyer who moved into HR leadership in the areas of diversity, inclusion, employment compliance, and employment practices. And essentially, I'm responsible for building the business solutions for organizations that are interested in building and leveraging diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging for their business success.
Awesome. Well, the first question does relate to business solutions in terms of organizations and onboarding. And I would love to kind of start off the conversation with, once you do have new hires join the first 30, 60, 90 days, what can organizations in terms of individual employees and employers do to ensure that, you know, new hires feel welcomed and they're set up for success? What do you think, Belinda?
So in the first 30 days, I think new employees from diverse backgrounds are looking for the same thing as new employees from majority population. They want a warm welcome. They want clarity in their role and expectations from their manager and leaders. They want help navigating the new organizational systems and understanding the lingo. And, you know, some things that can really help ensure their success during this period are assignment of something like an onboarding mentor, and particularly if you have available someone who's from you know, an underrepresented affinity group for your, you know, talent that comes in who has a diverse background, or an ally. Assigning someone like that to them to be their mentor can provide a sense of security during, these early days of uncertainty. And additionally, it would be really, really good early on to share with the new employees the company's commitment to diversity and inclusion, and understand, so that they can understand that the company does value this as not only a way of representing, the workforce, the communities, the customers that they serve, but also as a way of, doing business as a part of the culture. And so, the last thing I would say is to, if you do happen to have, networks or employee resource groups available, making sure that you connect the new employee in, because that can provide an instant level of support and broader networking beyond their immediate working group.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like to hit the ground running with a solid foundation of a holistic range of resources and support, and to have that prepared when employees start as well. Are there organizations or just trends that you see happening, Brandon, just out in the world where, you have that really good intention to build an inclusive workforce, but essentially maybe it falls flat, but the intention is there? And have you seen really successful strategies with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to kind of kick us off, but Cairo and Belinda, feel free to add and build as you see fit. One of the most common mistakes or trends I see in diversity, equity, and inclusion is that the programs itself, they're under-resourced. So oftentimes you'll have, a regional, national, global company, and there might be 2 or 3 folks working on diversity for a workforce of 2,000 employees plus, right? And while you have good intentions, it's a Herculean effort to ask just 3 individuals to maybe drive the cultural and systemic shift needed to support the diversity they're trying to retain, right? So sometimes we have aspirations to change the world, change the company, but we don't resource the aspiration, and we don't build the aspiration to be systemic. We sometimes apply business logic to all the other functions, but not D&I, right? When we talk about being sustainable, scalable, measurable, sometimes good intentions, it can feel as though the initiatives are being set up to fail. Another thing that I want to share is that diverse employees are oftentimes burdened to do the work of equity, diversity, and inclusion with no additional pay, resources, or support. So you want to retain people, and to Belinda's point, they're starting the job, they're trying to learn the culture, they're trying to also hone their craft, and now they're being tapped to lead diversity and inclusion. While that might not be an area of expertise, it also might not be what they signed up for. And while they have good intention and passion, we want to make sure that we don't overwhelm or overload our employees too, right? And that we also don't reduce their contributions to the business to just be D&I when we have strong people of color who are scientists, finance professionals, IT professionals, and sometimes we limit, again, maybe unintentionally, their contributions to the business just to be centered around their identity when there's so much more, So I would say what success looks like is when you encourage majority identities, that could be white people, men, able-bodied folks, whatever the majority is, depending on the identity, to help drive the cultural and systemic shift, right? I don't necessarily think it's fair to ask the people experiencing the disadvantage, experiencing the trauma, but they have to solve for it, So one of the things that has been successful at Syngenta and even at other companies that I've had a chance to work with is that there's actual real buy-in from the majority populations. And they recognize that they have more accountability in some spaces and more responsibility in some spaces to make the workplace enjoyable, because they already are in the majority. So they set the tone, they set the pace, they set the culture as to what's acceptable. And success starts when the whole company has an interest, not just the people who are affected by disenfranchisement. But again, Cairo, Belinda, any ads, bills, or thoughts there?
I think you covered it pretty well.
Yeah, I liked in our kind of planning call too, you talked about a time, a place, and a space for these kind of conversations, and how it is like a holistic perspective too. It's not just on one person or one group of people, it's really a 360 process and strategy too. And I think in terms of setting someone up for success and retaining employees, your manager is a huge part of that too. So in terms of how managers and really people who are working with individual contributors can create that culture of inclusion and foster that authentic environment, what does that actually look like in practice? And I'll pass this question over to Cairo to go first. And again, if anyone wants to add, feel free.
I think that it always starts with being very, very intentional about what you're looking for. So like I'm team building right now. You have to check in with yourself and really say like, what kinds of candidates am I getting? Is it skewed toward male? Is it skewed toward female? What kind of diversity do I want? And then actually go out and find it. So if a company is complaining about like, or if a company's members are complaining that there's like not enough Black folks working at the company, go to hiring events specifically for people of color and like find the diversity that you're looking for. I think that as leaders, the intention sometimes can get lost. I think it's like scary to bring up these topics. I bring it up pretty early when I start at small companies. I think that there's the earlier you start, the better in terms of like mindfulness around diversity. And I think that mindfulness is like the first practice. And then I think the other part of this, again, for leaders is like checking in with their team. So if, you know, if you're already building a bigger team into something that already exists, there's nothing wrong with surveying at any size, just to get a sense of like what people are really experiencing. And I say survey because sometimes we try to sit down in one-to-ones and have these conversations, or we try to have meetings around it, or we just start groups and just start targeting people and saying like, will you join this? Will you do this? And instead it might be a more comfortable forum for people to be able to give honest like feedback through a survey or something a little bit more anonymous. And then I also just love like data. So I think like a lot of these decisions should be data driven. And so whenever you can make that happen, do it.
Cairo, I just want to speak to the idea of mindfulness, and I think oftentimes like just keeping it top of mind. I know that in the D&I space, there's conversations around implicit bias or unconscious bias, but just starting with being mindful to say, is my job description skewed towards men or skewed towards women or people with a certain background or profession? Like it moves beyond just being aware of your bias to really taking that ownership to say, but I can change it. Like if I wrote a job description that's really narrow in scope, like what can I do to just change that? And I really like the idea of being mindful because it changes it from I need to constantly be educated to more like I need to be aware as a human, right?
Mm-hmm.
That I can own this. So I just wanted to share. That's a really great.
And I would
I
just step
also,
back one step from that and say also, in addition to being mindful the way you describe, Brandon, we also need to, you know, once an organization determines that we value diversity, we are striving to build an inclusive work place, that you also, on an individual basis, really understand the mindset of, you know, employees across the board, leaders across the board, because obviously driving towards those goals of a more diverse organization, a more inclusive environment is going to require everyone. So it's important to meet everyone where they are in terms of mindset about that, understanding about it. I mean, because you can push out all the information you want and all the definitions you want. You can value it as an organization, but we do also need to take that additional step of drilling down to the individual and ensuring that they understand and exhibit those values. And it begins with mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the idea of having a growth mindset of like, okay, I might have this unconscious bias or conscious bias, but now what can I do intentionally to change that, and also use data and metrics to make sure that this is happening across the board like any other strategy. And I think part of that growth mindset is just having that continuous employee feedback, manager feedback across all levels. Belinda, what like kind of feedback channels contribute to really an inclusive environment as well? If maybe someone, you know, feels comfortable going to their manager, they feel comfortable doing this, like what does that like really look like?
Yeah, so first and foremost, when employees have a way to feel heard and not be judged, their
Yeah.
trust level within the organization and the leadership really increases, and this has a positive impact on their overall engagement and contribution, right? And so building that trust is really important. So companies are most successful when they do have multiple channels of communication for employees that extend beyond their immediate manager or the leadership chain in their own organization. And when you combine those multiple avenues for feedback, plus that increased sense of trust that employees know that they are welcome to have their voices heard, the company, really benefits because it gains the earliest notice of the things we're doing great that we need to be doing more of, but also an early notice of concerns. And, concerns can be distracting, to not only the employee that it's directly impacting, but those we work in proximity, even in our virtual world, we're still working in proximity. And so the distractions can take away from moving towards, production and the like. And so I would say that you definitely benefit well from having those multiple avenues. And the other thing is that today's employee workforce is much more activist oriented than in the past. And also, they're not unique in that respect. Shareholders are more activist oriented. The communities and the governmental systems that support the communities that we exist in as businesses, they're more activism oriented, meaning that there's going to be a desire to speak up more than perhaps we have seen in the past. And so facilitating that in a number of different ways can be a strength for a company.
Absolutely. And I think that foundation of building trust is so important too, because you can have all the channels in the world and say you want the feedback, but if the employees aren't trusting that the feedback is going to be heard, I don't know how much feedback you're going to actually get there. And in terms of just having employees and also shareholders and just folks in general being more activist minded as well, we see all of these, again, like February is Black History Month, March is coming up, Women's History Month, Pride, and we see lots of organizations who are proudly celebrating, making statements, and celebrating heritage months. But I would love to know from kind of everybody, what does it really mean to celebrate these months and not have it be kind of more performative? And you've seen all of the articles as well of just what does it really mean to say we support our Black employees, or we support our LGBTQ employees. Brandon, if you wanted to start.
Sure. I'm just gonna speak as a person of color myself. I think Black History Month is a great opportunity to celebrate Black history, but oftentimes I ask where that celebration is in the leadership teams. Like if we really celebrate them, then the leadership team could have more diversity, and it's not just going to be your diversity officer that is the diversity on your team. I oftentimes think it shows up when it's not February. So like the continual conversations we have around anti-racism, or the continued conversation we have around gender equity, like to me, those are the things that show that it's a celebration. February is just an opportunity to spotlight, right? But recognizing that as Black people, Cairo, Belinda, and I have multiple other identities. Like if I'm really going to celebrate Black history, I have to celebrate Cairo and Belinda for the identities we share and that we hold that are different, So I think sometimes the organizations, once we got a turn here, I think sometimes organizations have fallen to the rut of doing cultural celebrations like it's the 90s, where they feel as though saying the term Black is enough. Whereas in 2020, people really want you to understand there's an experience beyond that, a multifaceted experience. And I want you to do more than just recognize it. I want you to support it. I want you to understand it. I want you to enable it. And like just screening a movie, right, or just bringing in a guest speaker might not change some of the systemic issues that people experience. So I'm speaking for Brandon, not as a representative of any organization on that one, but to me, that's where you see that change. Cairo?
I really agree with what you're saying. I also think and I'll be candid, if you're not doing it year round, don't bother with February. It's almost offensive. And so I think for me, the way I like to see celebration is by spreading awareness and learning. So I'm less interested in these fun facts of Black people who invented things and things like that, and more interested in companies saying okay, it's Black History Month. We're going to have a meeting about our internal structures and how they may be unfair to our Black employees. We're going to talk about pay gaps. We're going to talk about, like Brandon said, intersectional identities, because I agree that it's hard to separate that. I'm Black, I'm also a woman, I'm also queer, and all of that stuff is happening at the same time for me. So I'm not anti-celebration. I really believe in holistic experiences. And for me, I've never had a holistic Black History Month celebration. It's always been very surface level, and I would like to see like deep work done around that.
So, I have, I definitely feel that the celebrations and the recognitions are valuable inside of an organization in terms of increasing cultural competence, because increasing cultural competence is what helps the organization down to the individuals within uh, cross that bridge into understanding the world is bigger than perhaps the own bubble that you've lived in, your own bubble of your lived experiences. And so the opportunity to celebrate, for instance, Black History Month, that gets the ball rolling, but it also gives opportunity to lay the platform for some of the things Cairo mentioned or some of the things Brandon mentioned. And it also gives the opportunity to say, hey, it doesn't have to stop here. There's so many more different ways to celebrate Black History year round. And in my situation working for a global company, we were able to highlight how Black history is celebrated around the world, because it is celebrated around the world. And in addition to that, how to celebrate it on a year-round basis, or how to educate yourself. But the major benefit is really, increasing cultural competence. And one of the ways that you can do that very authentically is to have a way through employee resource group or otherwise reaching out to employees to get employees or allies to get involved in the process of creating and defining what the organization can do. Because we have, I think somebody mentioned earlier, within any one affinity group, they're not a monolith in terms of how they think. And so getting multiple ideas around how to approach it is great, and gives, ownership. Ownership for more than this is a company doing this. This is a shared part of our culture that we're all engaged in doing for the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I think it starts with the ownership of the internal work, and then also the external work of just sharing with others and planning and being strategic around that as well. I know that we kind of talked about this too, but oftentimes folks that do come from diverse backgrounds, whether it is people of color and specific employees, like take on that work too. And I definitely feel like it's not a point that can be overemphasized in terms of how do you not exhaust your employees who identify as such. And we do have a question here from one of our audience members that also relates to, in terms of what can you do if you work at a company whose leadership does not value diversity, equity, and inclusion, or prioritize diverse representation. So if you want to answer any of those questions, Brandon, if you want to go first.
Sure. I guess I'll speak to the question in the chat, and I would just say, sometimes there's a little bit of education that might need to happen, right? And you can present the business case, but you can also leverage some of your employee listening and employee feedback to show how, like, even if you personally might not see the value in diversity and inclusion, you have a workforce that's innately diverse that has to find ways to work together and synergize those differences for innovation. And as a leader, you have a unique opportunity to leverage that diversity in your workforce, to maximize the diversity in your workforce, to help your workforce get to the innovative things that move the bottom line, right? So in short, just to answer the question in the chat, I think it's important just to recognize the multiple angles, and certain people are motivated by different things. What I have found to be successful is having a holistic case for why diversity, equity, and inclusion is important to the business, and always relating it back to the experience of your employees, I think is a great start for any leader who's really thinking about their workforce as their most valuable asset.
Yeah, I think absolutely you want to become part of the solution wherever your organization is in terms of its, approach to or on the maturity curve around diversity and inclusion. Just like any other business strategy, as employees, that business doesn't stay the same, that it grows, it's constantly growing, it's constantly changing. And that ability to grow and change is heavily reliant on the innovation and collaboration and ideas that can come from the employee base, regardless of what position you hold in the organization. And so I think that this should be approached in the same way. Definitely, if you recognize that either nothing or more can be done, find a creative and innovative way to, like Brandon said, make the case. I mean, you can definitely look at your competitors and what they're doing and showing how they, have a competitive edge. I mean, that should motivate most business leaders. But become part of the solution. Help drive the solutions. And I think that would be a good start for any organization.
That's awesome. That makes a lot of sense that everybody should be part of the solution because it's a company-wide effort. The other question that we also kind of have is around, okay, if you have those metrics, is it potentially possible to over-index on these metrics in terms of recruitment and retention, and when you're measuring these things, what you need to keep in mind? Belinda, what are your kind of thoughts around that?
I mean, I think it goes back. I remember earlier Cairo mentioned something about, loving data. And I think that, it could possibly be possible to over-index if you're, just coming up with numbers and goals without really looking at your data and really prioritizing where your opportunities are and setting a plan to reach your short-term, mid-term, and long-term goals. I mean, I think that having strong data is absolutely the key, and that way you don't really have to worry about this quote unquote over indexing, because remember that building diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging in an organization is not a destination, it's a journey.
And I would like to build on that, Belinda, and just share that I think what I found in my experience is that when people overdex on data, they might be earlier on in their journey, because we recognize that data will only tell a partial story, will never tell a whole story. And we know that people can be so fearful to put their authentic and full truth in a survey. You're getting a glimpse, but you're never going to get that holistic view or that on the ground kind of understanding of what it might feel like. So I just encourage people to think beyond just data and really center on what their aspiration is. And one of the things that I have always kind of lived by is that, we should aspire to have a workforce that mirrors the people we're trying to serve. If we say we're a global company, our workforce should represent the global audience. You know what I mean? Or even if we're just talking about in regions, I understand the context of the United States might be different than the context of the UK, right, or Asia, but it doesn't mean diversity isn't present there. And you still want to mirror the diversity present in the context of the nation or the region. So if you're just setting goals, that can quickly fall into the idea of creating quotas, and you're going to get put back on that. But if you say we really want to galvanize and maximize the markets we're in, it seems like a no-brainer strategy is to make sure we have those perspectives represented in the organization too.
Yeah, absolutely. Is it ever too early to start measuring those kind of indexes and just making sure that diversity is baked into organizations early on? I feel like sometimes organizations are just like, we are going to focus on that later when we're larger. Cairo, you've had experience with a lot of startups and just really innovative companies, but what are your thoughts around just diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging early on in a company's journey?
Yeah, I think I said this earlier. I don't think that it's ever too early to start. I think that, and I think it's actually really important to start for early stage companies, because at that point, they're usually hiring department heads. And that's how it's easy to get into the habit of having a series of white cis males as all of your department heads. So I think the earlier you think about it, the better. I also think that the earlier you think about it, the easier it becomes, and it can become ingrained in your culture, and you'll become really attached to that culture early on. I think that we're not big enough is just a myth. I think that the larger you get, the more difficult it is to kind of rein in the bad habits you've built.
Yeah, absolutely. That definitely makes sense. We have another question just in the in the box here, related to just this idea of retention is something that you should be thinking about all the time, and it touches different departments. So in terms of, this is from the perspective of an individual employee, I think. So if you are a bystander and witness microaggressions or slights directed towards another employee, how do you recommend addressing that, and who should you go to first?
I think you should go. I think you should go to whoever you feel most comfortable, whether it be human resources, your immediate manager, whether it be an anonymous helpline that the company has set up, reporting line. And I think increasingly, particularly after the advent of the Me Too movement, you see a large number of organizations really I guess emphasizing the fact that, bystanders really bringing issues or concerns to our attention is very valuable for everyone. Because remember, again, something I mentioned earlier, we work in close contact with one another, whether we are face to face or even in our virtual environment. And so when something's impacting another individual, particularly if you're someone who's in close proximity and witnessed that, it impacts everyone else. It impacts so many others. And so that's why bystanders feeling comfortable stepping up and saying, hey, this happened, I have a concern, is so incredibly valuable. And so we have to ensure that, our policies and our approach as an organization invites that sort of inquiry.
I would say if you're in a smaller company that doesn't have those resources to like report things, I know the first thing I would do if that was me was to talk to the person that had the microaggression like happen toward them and see if they were okay with me saying something out loud, because small and like this has happened to me before where I've witnessed someone being mistreated and I asked her first, like, are you comfortable with me bringing up that this is an issue? Because that's her business, and you never know how the person feels. Like, not, again, we're going to come back to this a lot probably, not every Black person's experience is the same. Like, some folks don't really want to make a wave and other folks really want to start some shit, and I'm one of those folks. And so I'm always cognizant of like being the person who wants to help, and making sure that I've identified what help is to the person who needs it.
And I agree with Cairo and Belinda. I think there is a range of ways in which you could show up in the space. I think for me, it's about creating a company culture where people can talk to their peer. So like HR is always an option, but like I would hope that we are striving to create a community where Cairo or Belinda can say to me, "Hey, Brandon, what you said that wasn't cool, or that doesn't align to the values of AllVoices, or that doesn't align with the person you aspire to be." And I think there can be real value in peer-to-peer behavior, especially when we're talking about the experiences with majority groups and underrepresented groups. Like peer-to-peer is powerful. And I think sometimes people hear HR and think like, oh, that's the corporate response. But it's different if the person who works with you at the bench, like, hey, like that's unacceptable. I think it resonates in a different way. And to the person who asked the question in the chat, if you feel comfortable, I would challenge you and invite you to follow up with that employee who made that statement. And if you feel like you have the emotional bandwidth, really walk with them on that journey and help them understand how that might not meet the values of your company.
Yeah, the only other thing I would add is that there's a power also in a bystander neutralizing a situation on behalf of the employee who's being impacted, and saying, hey, let's not do that, or let's not say those kinds of things. There's a whole lot of power in that. I think the issue we run into, though, is that everybody's not equipped. Everybody does not have the same level of resiliency to speak up. And again, going back to Me Too, one of the main findings in how we even got to the point where bad actors were able to, assert their power through bad behavior for so long is a feeling that individuals didn't feel as if they could, speak up, even when they were witnessing something. And so, because, in every single case that we've seen, it was like people pretty much knew that, yeah, that's how such and such individual it behaves. So, having the ability to, get multiple inputs around circumstances, not only from the individual being impacted, but individuals who are around. But it's always good to be able to just directly say, hey, let's not do that.
Absolutely. I think the common theme there in the answers is the wrong answer would be do nothing about it. I feel like everything that was said is either you approach the person or you do a whole host of things of approaching the person who received the microaggression, approaching the person who gave it, and just using all of the feedback channels, or just like the trust that you have built with an individual, because at the end of the day, we're all working together, whether it's virtual or in person, and it's us who are responsible, like you said, Belinda, for creating this culture, whether it's positive or negative. So I think that's definitely important. Are there organizations, again, nobody being perfect, but that are on kind of the right way that we should look to as really good models of folks who are being super intentional about that holistic approach? They're thinking about these strategies in a really proactive way. You can name names or you don't have to, but just like giving someone a model of just like, okay, these are tangible things that can really point us in a direction, as opposed to checking a box, and anyone can answer.
I think that organizations like Diversity Best Practices, the Human Rights Campaign Organization, the Disabilities, National Disabilities Organizations, and others all maintain what's called indexes that have a number of different things that an organization is measured against. And the point is, if you're doing these things well, then you're a definition of an organization that's being very, very impactful. And so every year these working mothers magazine or Working Women's magazine, they all put out these wonderful indexes that really provide a really nice list of things that a company can do or engage in to really drive towards a more diverse and inclusive organizations. And then they'll post and tell you, here's the companies that measured 100% against these indexes for whatever affinity is being measured. So I would go there. I wouldn't call out any companies, but I would go there to see, the last year's index and who was scoring high on these, and learn a little bit more about some of the best practices.
I would add to Belinda's point, maybe not, a company doesn't come to mind off immediately, but I think any company that can normalize the conversation where it doesn't feel like we have to stop and have the conversation, but rather having the conversation is our way of working, is a best practice. And I think that kind of rolls up all of the things that the four of us have been sharing around, like creating that culture. It's like, does it have to be Pride? Does it have to be Hispanic Latinx Heritage Month for us to have a conversation about how people are treated? And do we have to wait for the month to come to recognize people's intersections? So I think any company that aspires to make this conversation normal, just like a conversation around KPIs or a conversation around P&L, or things that maybe drive like our ongoing work, is a company that has moved from checking the box to really embedding it into their ways of working.
Absolutely. I think that definitely makes a lot of sense in terms of that holistic strategy, 365 days a year, not just one single month, and also actively listening to employees, and again, building that sense of trust as well. Also, just wanted to remind all kind of attendees, if you have any questions, feel free to send them in the chat and we will see them there. But also wanted to ask, I know we touched on this a little bit earlier as well, in terms of what role employee resource groups play in this entire kind of conversation as well. Oftentimes ERGs are kind of volunteer roles, but they are really important communities in companies. So also wanted to pose the question of just aside from what we've talked about in terms of planning celebrations and doing this programming, what kind of goals or community do ERGs provide in retaining employees?
I can start. I think when ERGs are really aligned with the business and they have a chance to really influence and inform the way in which we go to market, the ways in which we structure our people processes, If people see that ERGs are really involved in the accountability and implementation of a diversity and inclusion plan or strategy, it shows that it's beyond just having them to plan the Black History Month event or to plan the Pride event. Is that no, we have you here to really maybe broaden our perspective, right? We have you here to really help us co-create something better. And I think that's a surefire way to show that ERGs go beyond just window dressing, right? And that you really want to have them closely tied to key business initiatives. I just want to kind of speak to the fact that we also don't want to like over index on ERGs. And like ERGs are not going to be the magic wand or the magic bullet for 400 years of inequity in a country or like millions of years of inequity in a world, you know? So like I encourage people to leverage ERGs, but I think maybe more importantly, you know, when you have, to Belinda's point earlier, when you have these feedback sessions, you do these surveys, to Cairo's point, like do you pair action with it? Do you take the survey and get the results and maybe share it or maybe not? Or do you get the results and then do you go back to ERGs, back to majority groups and say, help me act in this? What's our capacity to do this? And I think it changes the narrative that like we're doing diversity to check the box, but we're doing diversity for quality assurance. And I don't think a lot of companies have ever framed it that way. So I think there's an opportunity, is what I'm trying to do, is to say like it needs to be a continual process to make sure that we are aligned with what we say. You know, so many companies, like, it's easy for employees, it's easy for people on our talent pipeline to see a really nice website, but then go to Glassdoor and see that there might be a lie being told. So like you really want to like move to a place where there's really some alignment and you're making sure that you're moving that needle.
Yeah, I agree. I just want to add to that ERGs represent a massive way for employees to get involved. Remember, we said that, this is something that everybody can get involved in and contribute to their community, within their company. So it gives others an opportunity to get involved. Employee resource groups give development opportunity for the leaders within those organizations where they might not have those opportunities within their immediate job responsibility. There are, national and global networks of individuals engaged in employee resource groups that they can belong to and, just get a tremendous amount of insight and information from. Like Brandon said, they give insight to the business from a particular affinity group's point of view that they might not otherwise be able to get. They help build, employee resource groups help build bridges to the community groups that represent that affinity. They help build bridges to the professional associations that can help an organization augment and build its pipeline to, some of these organizations, whether it be veterans or whether it be, an ethnic organization or whether it be early career network for employees. So, those are all great places to carry your organizational brand and great places to build pipelines of, talent into your organization. So employee groups can facilitate all of that. I'm a firm believer in the value of employee resource groups.
Absolutely. I love employee resource groups. I think they're great too for employee engagement and community, but I feel like a common thread too in the conversation of, this holistic strategy is there's no one silver bullet. That's not check the box. We have ERGs. We're going to retain our employees now. We have another question in the box too as well about how can you make sure diverse employees don't fear retaliation in speaking up when bias or discrimination does come up specifically. It's for anybody.
Well, something that we mentioned before, having multiple avenues of their ability to bring a concern forward, and also one of those avenues ensuring that they have a way to anonymously provide input on a concern. Because retaliation is just a major number one fear not only retaliation from, who you afraid of retaliation from your managers or, the leadership, but sometimes, peers can provide pressure on an individual who wants to step forward to talk about something that they feel shouldn't be talked about outside of the group. And that's an unfortunate, situation to be in. And so that having an anonymous reporting line is huge in terms of providing a way for an employee to bring a concern forward.
I agree with Belinda. I think something that I've been trying to center is that, the employee experience is important, but to recognize that, sometimes the experiences of underrepresented folks is like a global or wider spread phenomenon. I oftentimes say jokingly in workspaces, like, I can talk about the trauma that Black people experience. We can talk about the trauma that women experience, but I feel like multiple people have dedicated their life to it. Like, if Malcolm X has said it, I don't know if I can say it any better. So I think sometimes it's important to affirm that and to validate that. And I think when people are affirmed in their experience, it gives them the strength to navigate that retaliation. But if they feel like they're in an organization where people are going to discredit what they're saying is not true innately, I can see that being just one more thing that would make someone say, is it worth it? Is it worth sharing? Is it worth staying? So yeah, I think at the core, to Belinda's point, having a process for anonymous feedback that is affirming is a big key. And then let the investigation be the investigation. But we don't want to create like a hush hush culture from the onset,
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like since the employee experience, especially for employees with diverse backgrounds, is different for everybody, it might not be the organization that they're at, it might be previous experiences that are just giving them the sense of, okay, I'm afraid if I'm going to be retaliated against for giving this piece of feedback. I feel like that's something that we've heard as well across different employees as well. So just recognizing, and again, I believe, Belinda, you mentioned like meeting people where they are is so important. So just that anonymous avenue to give feedback, while also making sure it's psychologically safe and you are affirming employees. It's not anonymous feedback that goes nowhere and nobody's listening to it. Again, having a structure and strategy in place is really important. So I know we have a couple more minutes left, so definitely wanted to make time and make sure we had time for our call to action for individuals and organizations who are listening to the webinar in terms of what can you do as one, a company, and second, as an individual employee to ensure that you're creating this inclusive work environment, whether it's in person or virtual, to promote this retention across the board, and anyone can start.
I'll start. I just want to reiterate how important it is to be intentional about these things and to be mindful. I think the biggest mistake that companies can make is talking about diversity and not actually making any actionable moves on it. So I think that it starts with mindfulness and it starts with intention. And as someone who works in tech, there's technology out there to help fight bias. There's like hiring software out there. There's tons of resources. So there's really no excuse.
I would say absolutely don't be afraid to lean in. Enough years have gone by with enough research and enough proof to show that, diversity and inclusion is a business strategy that drives business success. It's not just a range of programming or doing this or doing that. It actually drives business success. And so just like any other strategy that you might employ to drive for success, really lean in. I think that's, just really a different way of saying what Cairo said about being intentional.
I agree with Cairo. It's about intention and action. Absolutely. And leaders play a key role in that. And they can also demonstrate what that looks like to the workforce who might not know how to show that commitment and action in their scope of work and responsibility. I would just encourage employees across underrepresented backgrounds to work together. Like, I think sometimes we forget that our oppression is bound together, right? So one group being better than the other doesn't actually help equity or inclusion. So sometimes I just want to remind employees that, our collective efforts move the needle, but working in silos will not have the impact that you're looking for.
I want to add one more thing for employees. I also think it's, as an individual person, it's really, really important to be aware of your privilege in situations because that can direct where you can help.
Absolutely. And I love the point that you brought up with the P word, privilege, it's across all intersections, and it's something that we can definitely talk more about as well in terms of individuals and, you know, a simple question about what are you doing this weekend, or just like all of these things that we don't think about, your Zoom background or something like that. I think that's really important to talk about when you're talking about retention and these things that can just build up over time and really contribute to an inclusive culture. So I love that as well. The other question I did want to ask to all of our panelists too is if you had either a personal or company plug that you did want to share with the audience too, so we just know a little bit more about either the company and the work that you're doing. Brandon, if you wanted to start first.
I mean, I guess on a personal note, I would invite people to maybe just check out literature and points of view they don't often explore. Like, it's easy for me to really hone in on like the Black experience, right, or like the experience of the South. I think in order for me to be a strong ally and a better collaborator with other people, other identities, like maybe I should check out the Hispanic Latinx experience. Maybe I should check out what the Asian American experience is. So it's not a personal plug for me, but more of an invitation just to broaden your horizons, right? And you don't know what you don't know, but you won't know if you don't look. And then I think, you know, I mean, the truth, you know. And then I think as far as like the companies that I have a chance to work for, I think everyone is trying a concerted effort. I think the professional plug would be for companies to work together. Like, I know every company wants to be the best, but competition erodes at equity too. So I think it's an experience that all companies are trying to navigate. It's a challenge for all companies. This panel is an opportunity for me to work with Cairo and Belinda. Like, we don't have to operate in silos.
Yeah, I would just say that, you know, look, we're at the point of a huge paradigm shift in the way we view our organizations, in the way we view our communities around them, in the way we view the talent that we have within our organizations. And that shift has created a whole new recipe for success. And so in past years, we've done a whole lot of talking about the value of diversity and inclusion. But I think when the world saw a number of individuals step out from our community, step out in support of a less racist society, of more equity in society, of recognition that, you know, there are differences in society that are keeping us from being the very best. That has elevated, you know, the attention that organizations have given. And so I would say, you know, a lot of organizations, yes, they put statements out there. And I believe, you know, let's not assume negative intent. I believe there was good intent and has been and continues to be. And so if you're one that has particular insight or ideas, be part of the solution, you know, to help the organization get to where it's trying to go.
I have no real plug, but I will say that for anyone who's coming from just a small space where there aren't resources and you might be feeling discouraged, to just like hang in there. It's totally worth it to have these conversations on a small scale and then scale up from there, because eventually it's going to make a difference.
Absolutely. So what I'm hearing is we are all in this together. We should definitely see this not as a zero-sum game, but work together, whether you're at a smaller organization or larger organization. There are resources, indexes, and folks out there who are doing the work. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, and we can work together to make sure that our organization and ourselves are doing better every day to help retain great talent and really put an emphasis on being intentional, because at the end of the day, we can say that we value diversity, equity, and inclusion all we want, but if there's no strategy behind it, then we just won't be able to retain anyone. Well, it is almost 3, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time, but if the attendees want to reach out to any of our panelists, their names are in the email and on the screen here. Just wanted to give a huge thank you for dedicating some time to speak about your interests, passions, and expertise as well. And also, thank you to AllVoices as well for just sponsoring the discussion as well. We definitely believe in the value of employee feedback and giving people leaders just the ability to take that data of what we talked about, really track and see, are people listening to employee feedback, and give employees a voice across all channels too, and providing that psychologically safe workplace for everybody, no matter the size of the company you work for. So if you're interested in learning more, feel free to reach out afterwards. But thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you, Christina. Nice
Thank
meeting you,
you.
Cairo.
Bye,
Nice
folks.
meeting you guys too.